Hey guys, this is Tyler with noobgrammar.com. Uh, noobgrammar.com is a blog I started for developers and learning to code and all that stuff. If you want to go check it out, I'll put a link to it in the description. This video is supposed to be a complimentary piece to a blog post on that site. I'll have a link to that post as well, and all the code will be on GitHub, and I'll have a link to that too. Alright, let's talk about this. So this video is going to be an introduction into Windows Forms. We're going to build a simple calculator app. It's going to look like this. You can do your equations here. So 5 times 10 is 50. And then you can do more complex equations. So 50 times 2, I don't know, plus 10, I don't know, divided by 2 again, equals 55. Then we got our clear button. We can do decimals, so 5.2 plus 0.6, 5.8, and then you've got a file exit button. Alright, let's open Visual Studio and get to it. Now that we've got Visual Studio open, let's click Create New Project. Make sure you have the Windows Forms app.NET Framework option selected. Let's browse to our location, and it looks like I'm already where I want to be. I do want it to create a directory for this solution. Let's call it Simple Calculator and click OK. So what we're greeted with here is the default form that Visual Studio creates for us. We're currently in Design View, and what Design View means is that we can do anything we want to with it as far as our presentation and the layout of our controls or buttons. We can do them visually instead of having to rely on code. So the first thing we're going to do is make this a little bit bigger, and that's more of an OCD thing for me. The second thing we're going to do is go ahead and change the name of our form class over here in our Solution Explorer. Form 1 is, again, just the default name that Visual Studio gives it. So let's make it something a little more friendly. Let's call it Calculator. Okay, it's going to ask us if we want to change all of our references to it, so we want to say yes. Okay. In addition to changing the name of our form class to Calculator, we also want to change this title here. So we can make sure it's selected. Go over here to our Properties box, and you've got two different options here. You can sort it alphabetically, or you can leave it in the categorized grouping. So let's go ahead and sort it alphabetically, and I want to say, okay, that particular field is called text, so let's name that, or call that calculator as well. Okay, and you can see we have changed it here. Now there are a lot of other properties in here that you'll see. Most of these deal with the behavior of certain elements. Let's look at one for instance. Okay, the back color for instance, in the background image. We're not going to use an image for this, but let's change the back color. Right now it's at the default control theme. Let's change this to like this blue. Why not? Okay. So I'm not going to leave it blue, but this is just kind of an example of what these items do. You can change the cursor. Let's do something weird like that. And I don't think we're going to see that until we hit Control plus F5. And you can see that it's showing the cursor, the loading cursor. So let's close that out and change this back to default, and then change this back to control. So let's start at the top and go down. So to add controls to our application, click on Toolbox, and you'll see a whole bunch of different stuff here. You can go through your windows and see everything you've got, or you can just click on all Windows Forms and it will show you every control you have available to you. So let's go to, I believe it's called Menu Strip. Click it and drag it and add it to the application. And you see we've got this little snippet down here, and we also have this information up here. Oh, this control up here, I should say. So click on the Type Here button. I want to call it File, and then click on this Type Here button and click type in Exit. Okay, and then just click out of that. And now if we Control plus F5, we can click on File. Then we can click on Exit, but it's not going to do anything. What I would like to do is go ahead and build our form first, and then go through and hook everything up. The next thing we need to do is add a text box control to this application. The text box control is going to be what displays the information that we're putting into the equation and display our answer for it as well. So let's go ahead and click on Toolbox, go down to Text Box, click and drag. And Visual Studio has a snapping mechanism built into it. It's pretty good. It's designed to make your applications look more professional, so you don't have things just kind of thrown all over the place. At least there's some rhyme and reason with that snapping. So go ahead and drop it on there and then drag it to make it a little bit longer. And let's change the font. And remember, over here in the Properties window, if you're not seeing things the same way I'm seeing them, you may have the categorized option selected instead of the sort alphabetically option. So just make a note of that if you see something that looks different than what I'm doing. So to change the font, find the font option, maximize it, and we have a few more options here. Let's go ahead and change this to 20. And then the next thing we need to do is change the read-only property. Now the read-only property basically says that users cannot put information into this text box. If we were to test it right now, so Control plus F5, we could type whatever we want to in here. So blah, blah, blah. Now, in our application, giving the user the ability to type stuff in here could potentially screw up our solving mechanism. Let's go ahead and close this back out and change this to true. Now when we change it to true, it also changes the color of our control, and we don't want that to blend in with the background, so let's just go back up here to back color, change this to white, and then the last thing we need to do is change the text align so that everything is centered. So find the text align property, click the down arrow, and hit center. Okay, let's go ahead and Control plus F5 to test it. And now you can see our text would be typing out in the middle of it. Alright, let's go ahead and add the buttons to our calculator. Toolbox, make sure you have all Windows Forms expanded. Click on Button, drag it over to your form, align it. Let's make it a little bit more square. And this one is going to be our equal button. So over on your Properties window, while you have that selected, go down to Text. We'll type in equals here. Let's change the font size a little bit to make it look more pronounced. So let's change this to 20. Go up to name. Now the name is really important here. This is the name that we're going to use to reference this control object within our code. So we need something that is unique and descriptive. You could leave it as button 1, but anytime you added more buttons, it would follow that pattern of button 1, button 2, button 3, button 4, and eventually it's going to get really confusing to know which button you're talking about in your code. So the way I do it, I call it btn underscore equals. Okay. Now let me grab my template here so I know what I'm doing. So let's go ahead and make the rest of our buttons the same way. So Control C, Control V. This one's going to be the plus sign. This one's going to be the minus sign. This one's going to be the multiplication sign. And this one's going to be the divide sign. Okay. And I'll probably fast forward through this so you guys don't have to watch me do every single one of these. Okay, now that I've got those buttons created, you might notice that there's a little bit of extra space here. We can actually fix that pretty easily using some of the extra controls that are in Visual Studio. So go ahead and drag the rightmost one, align it to the end of your text box, and then select all of the other ones holding Control, and then come up here to this toolbox, or tool strip I should say. Make horizontal spacing even or make vertical spacing even. Now we're wanting to space them horizontally, so let's go ahead and space them out. And now we have perfectly aligned buttons. Okay, now I'm going to add the rest of the buttons, and it's a very similar process, so I'll just fast forward through it so you guys don't have to watch me again. Okay, now that we have our number buttons created, let's go ahead and space everything. Let's go ahead and get our vertical spacing first. So let's select this entire row, make vertical spacing even. So we'll do the same for these. And it looks like we're a little bit too close to the edge on this side of our form. So let's go ahead and fix that as well. Let's just deselect these, move this one over until we get the proper snap. Then we should be able to align these to the left edge. And then let's go ahead and select each row at a time, or each row one at a time. Make horizontal spacing even. Do the same thing. And now we have our buttons. So before we start hooking up these buttons to actually do anything, we need to talk about the code. Specifically, we need to figure out all of the things that we're going to have to do to make this work. So we're going to have to keep track of the numbers that are pressed. We're going to have to keep track of the operators that are selected. And we're going to have to hook up this clear button so that we actually clear out our equation and start from scratch. And we're going to have to make sure we account for decimal numbers. And finally, we're going to have to make sure that our input and output display in this text box. So let's start with the easy one. We need a list to keep up with our numbers. So right click, go over here to the Solution Explorer, right click on calculator.cs, go to view code, and this shows us the code that actually builds this form for us. So let's go above our constructor, create a variable, private list of doubles, wow, double numbers. Now we're using doubles here because integers will not allow us to use decimals correctly. We get into a lot of rounding errors, and it's just not as robust as we need for this application. And then we need to initialize our numbers list. So this dot numbers equals new list of double. And IntelliSense is a wonderful thing. So the operators are a little bit different. We could just make a list of characters to represent our operators, but really we want them to do a little bit more. We want a method in them that we can pass in two numbers, the number before we do the operation, and then the number that is going to be applied as the operation. And the best way to do that is to create a class that has that method built into each operator. So let's go ahead and create that class. So right click on the project name, so simple calculator, right click, go to add new folder, type in classes, right click on classes, go to add class, we'll call it operator, and we have our operator class. Now I'm going to paste in some code. So what is this code? We have the private character op variable, and this is what's going to hold our the character that represents the operation we're trying to perform whenever we create an instance of this operator class. So in our constructor, you can see we're passing in an operator and assigning it to our operator variable. Now, this public double apply method is what does all the work for us. So we're returning a double again so that we keep our decimals intact, and we're passing in two doubles. The before is the number before we do any of the calculations based off this operator. The number after is the number that would come directly after the operator. So in effect, if we were adding something together, we have the number before we did the operation, and then the number we're adding to the original number. And the way we're going to do that is, and I've just got a variable here that kind of makes it easier to type out because before is a little bit longer. So double B equals before, and then we have a switch statement. So we're going to switch on the operator. If the operator is a minus sign, we're just going to subtract the after number from our B number. If it is a plus sign, we're going to add it. If it's a multiplication sign, we're going to multiply it, and so on and so forth. Once we perform our operation, we're just going to return that new result. So let's go ahead and save it. And then we can close out of this. So back in our calculator.cs code view, now we can create a list of operators. So private list operator ops. Okay, now we have a red squiggly. The reason why this is showing up is because we don't have any kind of reference to our operator class. If you hover over the problem code, you'll see this show potential fixes button, and it will create this using directive for us that points to our classes. So let's go ahead and double click it or single click it, and you can see it inputs that line into our code and fixes our squiggly. and then save it. Lastly, we want a string that is going to represent our equation, and we're going to use it to populate our text box. So on a new line, private string, let's just call it equation. And we also need to initialize these two variables. So this dot ops equals new list operator. Then this dot equation equals just an empty string. Okay. Now that we have our variables that we're going to need, let's go ahead and create a function that's going to handle our text box for us. And that's going to be private void, because we're not needing it to do anything, update text box string text box tb. And the reason I'm doing it this way, I'm a firm believer in making your code as reusable as possible. So rather than hard code the name of the text box here, which actually I think we may have forgot to go back and change, this allows us to do it completely independently of our names, and you'll see what I'm talking about. So let's go ahead and write this, and it's really simple. So tb.text equals string. That's all there is to that method. And why are we getting a squiggly? Oh, that's not text, that's tab index. Okay. So while we're on that topic, let's go back to our calculator design view and give our text box a name. So let's call it TB equation. Okay. Now we can finally start hooking up some of our buttons. So let's go ahead and click on the 0 button and then just double click it. And if you go back to the calculator.cs file, you will see that we have some extra code in here that Visual Studio has added for us. So let's go ahead and put some code in here. So this dot equation plus equals, this is the 0 button, so we're going to add a 0 to it as a string, because remember, equation is a string. Then update text box, this dot equation, then we have to give it our text box, so this dot tb equation. Now if we save everything and run it, so Control plus F5, if we click on 0, 0 shows up in our text box. So now we're going to do the same thing with our other number buttons, and again I'll fast forward it so that you don't have to sit and watch me do all of it. Okay, now we have all of our numbers hooked up, and if we Control plus F5 again, we can go ahead and type any of our numbers into here, and as you can see, they all show up on our text line. So now that we have our number buttons hooked up, let's go ahead and start working on our operator buttons. So let's close this out, go back to our design view, and we'll start at the plus button first. The equal button is a little bit more complicated. We'll do it probably closer to the end. So let's double click on the plus button, and it creates our code for us. And what we're going to do is add the number to our list of numbers, and that's numbers.add, then this dot equation, because if you remember, equation is what is holding our numbers that we're putting in. Now the problem is that our numbers list is a list of doubles. Well, equation is a string, so we need to convert it. Now we could cast it, but I prefer a method that we can modify if we need to later on that will actually do this for us. So let's go back up a little bit before our click functions. So private double convert to double string str, then double d equals double dot parse string. Then we want to return d. Now you could have written this as return double dot parse str. It's really however you want to do it. This way actually probably looks a little bit better, but just do whatever you're comfortable with. And I will go ahead and leave it at that. So let's go back down to our plus function. So convert to double. And then our equation will be our string that we pass in. Okay. Then we need to add an operator to our operators list that says, okay, for this particular operator, we're going to add the two numbers. So ops.add new operator with a plus character. And then finally, we want to reset our equation to a blank string so that we can start with the next number in our series. So this dot equation equals blank string. And for the sake of consistency, let's just add the this keyword to our list. Okay. Now I'm going to do the same thing to the other buttons. They're pretty similar. The only real difference is that we're changing the operator. So calculator minus. And again, we can just copy this. And the operator is going to be minus. Let's go back to this one. And this is the multiplication button. So let's go ahead and give it the multiply operator. And then the divide button, same thing. And that takes care of our operator buttons. Now let's look at the clear and the decimal button. So double click on the decimal button. And really this is very similar to adding a number. So this dot equation plus equals just a decimal. And again, we're going to update the text box. So update text box. This dot equation, and then this dot tb equation. For our clear button, we'll go ahead and click it and add our event for it. We're going to reset the equation to a blank equation. Then we want to update the text box, so update text box. Then we also need to get rid of the numbers and the operators that we currently have stored, because if we held on to them, then we would run into problems when we started our new equation. So to do that, we do this dot numbers dot clear, then this dot ops dot clear. So let's go ahead and look at our handiwork here. Control plus F5 to run it again. Now we can type in anything we want to. Now we can't solve anything yet, but we can clear everything out. And we need to hook up this file exit button. So let's close this out. So go back to your design view, click on the file, double click on the exit item here, and again we have another a piece of code that Visual Studio generates for us. And this is really simple. All we have to do is type in this.close. And that's it. Control plus F5 again. File, exit. So the last thing we have to do is implement the solve function. So let's go ahead and hook up our equals button. So double click on it. It creates the code for us. Let me paste some stuff in here. Now we're doing something that's very similar to our other operator buttons. We are adding a number to our numbers list converted from our equation string. We are adding a new operator to our ops list, which is just an equals operator. Now this equation equals this dot solve is what we're going to focus on with our solve method. And then of course we update the text box again. So for our solve method, I'm going to go ahead and paste some more code in here. And what we have here, we have the starting point for our equation, which is just the first number in our numbers list. So we have a variable that stores that. Then we loop through it, then we do some funky stuff here, and then we return the answer into our equation. And then we update our text box to represent the new equation. So let's go back to this funky stuff here. So again, we're starting at 1 because we've already pulled out the 0th element, which means that when we reference the operator, we have to subtract 1 because our loop is really 1 ahead. Okay, so we go into our ops list, pull out an operator at the appropriate index, and then we call the apply method on our before number, and then we want to get the next number in the number list and either add it, subtract it, multiply it, or divide it into the previous number. Then after we go through this loop, we return it, and that's how we get our final equation. And there'll probably be a more detailed explanation of this loop on the blog post if you want to go check that out. So let's go ahead and run our application, and everything should work now. So 5 times 2 plus 20 divided by 3, 10. Okay, let's try the decimal. So 10, oh, there's a bug already, but that's okay. 10.5 times 2, 21. Now, again, this is a simple calculator app. Some of them you'll see out there will show you multiple numbers and the operators and all that in the text box there. You can definitely do that with this project if you want to, but I wanted to give you a baseline of how to do this. So if you come up with anything you want to add to it, just have at it and see if you can figure it out. Alright, I think that's it. Alright, that's it for this project, so I hope you guys learned something. Again, noobgrammar.com, there'll be a blog post that corresponds with this video, and I will post the GitHub link for this code in the description of the video. And as always, thank you guys for watching.